Ash Sarkar of Novara Media fame has got a book out. Her first book, Minority Rule, comes out on the 27th of February. Pre-order it now. She talks about how identity politics has been weaponized on the right, and also how liberal identity politics has infiltrated the discourse. So I want to watch a bit of an interview where she talks about this on Pod Save America. Let's get straight into it.
So I opened the chapter by talking about a situation that I was in. I was facilitating this big discussion. It was on the left. There was like maybe, a couple of hundred people in the room. And the idea was everyone weighs in on what's gone wrong for the left in the last few years and what should be done about it. And there were some speakers whose job it was to sort of come in and set out their stall. And people could decide, do we agree with them or not? And one of the speakers was Roger Hallam, who is the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, Just Stop Oil. I think he's currently still in prison. And whatever you think about this man or these organizations, he walks the walk. Yeah. All right. You cannot accuse this person of, just mouthing off and doing nothing. All right. Like he's literally put his life and his freedom on the line. So he's answering the question, what do I think's gone wrong? And he looks around the room and he goes, it's because you're all a bunch of fucking cunts. Which I think is the funniest thing really that could have happened. And there's something about him which is very Gandalf-like. Yeah. Like he's sort of irritated and urgent and he's got the, silver hair. And so I was like, oh, this is like Gandalf vibes where he's get out the fucking Shire and go. And I just thought, well, this is a room full of adults, right? So people might say, look, I think that you're just trying to shock us into doing what you want, or, this is sort of emotionally manipulative. That would all be fine. Instead, you had grown adults being like, this has brought violence into this space. I've been harmed by it. This is bringing in white anger. And I was like, get a grip. Like, this is a old man climate activist who's done some swearing. That's it. Yeah. That's it. Like, look, what is...
I'd be interested to know when this was. Was this at the peak of Extinction Rebellion 2019, or is it more recently? But obviously this is absurd. And I think this is more of a liberal problem, like a London intelligentsia kind of wealthy middle class liberal problem. Because in my experience, leftists are quite edgy. You look at some of the biggest leftist streamer, Hassan, always cracking jokes, pretty edgy. Destiny's kind of gone insane in the last few years and allegations, but he's edgy. He's pretty crazy. You would not say he's politically correct. The same with Vosh, Abigail Thorne, ContraPoints, probably one of the most well-respected leftists. ContraPoints, constantly making edgy jokes. And I think this is obviously a problem. I'm not saying it's not a problem on the left. We all obviously have a optics kind of PR issue of how we come across as fuddy-duddy, offensive, like easily offended. But in my experience, it's just not true. Like literally, some of the biggest streamers are edgy. Like the cracking jokes are not politically correct. They'll say the R word. They, and they get a lot of stick for that on the left. But my problem is I think we need diversity of tactics. We need people who are sensitive, people who are, more wary of like people, because there are sensitive people, and we should also be edgy. We should be funny. We should be strong. We should be verbose. And I've had recent experience of this because my video somewhat went viral with Shoe on Head, and I've got a lot of her audience coming over, and they're saying to me, "Oh, you're so polite. You're so respectful. You're so kind of moderate." And the left can't win in a way because that's reacting to a video of Destiny, Vosh, some pretty edgy people. So we're both being told simultaneously, oh, we have to be kind and respectful. But also when we are edgy and, quite mean and a bit nasty and vitriolic, it's like, whoa, you're going to alienate people. You're going to, just... But they're gaslighting us. We should be more edgy, vitriolic, funny, strong. And I continue to hopefully be a bit of that. I am more kind of, respectful, but we need to be stronger and have a sense of humor because a lot of the time we don't. But I think what Ash is pointing at here, I think we are getting better. I think the kind of peak of this woke scold kind of sensitivity was like 2018, 19. And I think with the left, again, the left is not a monolith. You're talking about the online left. You've got people like you've got tankies, you've got people who are more sensitive, you've got edgelords, you've got. I kind of want to know specifically who she's talking about. And again, to start with an anecdote in the book, not that it's a problem per se, but when was that? And I think it's not necessarily indicative of the left. I think it's more of a liberal middle class problem that is maybe specific to London.
Is the harm.
Mm.
And that was when I realized that that's not an isolated incident.
That's a good question. Again, we've got to ask ourselves, where is the harm? Because when there is clear harm, when you like say a slur or say something that is problematic and leads to dark places, I think you should call it out. But is swearing harmful? Of course it's not. In that, if anything, that's the ideal thing you want. A story. You want to wake people up and go, this is real problems. How do we solve problems? Your feelings don't really matter here at the moment, especially with climate change.
I've seen versions of this happen a million times. I literally have heard of an organizers weekend. So these people were supposed to be on the ground doing the work. It all fell apart because they were acting out kitchen utensils for an icebreaker. And then people were saying that the salad spinner was white supremacist and classist. And then the rest of the weekend got derailed. There is a culture of sensitivity being set at this insane bar. People competing over who can present themselves as a victim.
Yeah.
The threshold for harm being just ridiculously comically.
Again, the context here seems like a very middle class kind of liberal Guardian reader. I don't think this is, again, I think they've been conflated, especially in the UK and America, liberal and leftist. No, often liberals are pro-capitalist. They kind of just, this is why they focus on identity politics, because they can't go a step further into like a Marxist materialist analysis and go, yes, it should be about freedom from the constraints of capitalism, freedom from the exploitation of capitalism. And that's where the left have fallen into that. And it's complicated, but I think we are getting better. But the problem is there's no real leftist project at the moment. Like, we're so fragmented and so atomized. Like, there's no coherent leftist project really in America or the UK.
Low. And that's stopping people from being able to do useful collective work, right? It poisons and toxifies our ability to connect with one another, to work together. So if we're doing that to ourselves on the left, no wonder the right are going, well, this is a great technique.
Yeah.
This stops people from doing anything. And that's why that chapter is important. It's not just about pointing the finger. And you know that famous saying, whenever you point a finger, there's three pointing back at you. I recognize myself in some of this stuff. And those are the things that I regret. You know, this whole thing of like, oh, every minority gets to define its own oppression. That's crazy, because that doesn't mean you're right. It doesn't mean that you're saying it in good faith.
So much of the book is about essentially how social majorities splinter themselves and prevent themselves from ever actually moving forward as a group because we're too busy fighting amongst ourselves half of the time.
We're talking during a week where Keir Starmer is like, I'm going to do something that's never been done before. Demonize asylum seekers.
Love an original.
No one has ever done this before.
It's not been done in the last 100 years. That's not literally what much of right-wing politics has been about, immigration. Not at all.
And I feel like, you know that film where only one guy can remember the Beatles? I feel like that about the Blair years. So because everyone's like, wow, a Labour Prime Minister going hard on immigration. I was like, am I the only one? Am I the only one that can remember Tony Blair and David Blunkett?
But I do want to ask you, because look, I share a lot of your concerns about identity politics. However, I'd be lying if I didn't say that identity politics politicised me. And I really sort of saw myself, particularly around, movements of Black and brown people, young movements. It really made me a political person, which I wasn't really before. It opened my eyes to it. There's got to be some good in it, right? And also, we have to admit, the left has traditionally let down, Black and brown people, feminists. I mean, I'm thinking particularly about trade unions. A lot of trade unions have not done as well as they could have done for women's work and protecting women workers, and also, the Black and brown workers who are working class. I don't know why we're constantly told that we're not working class. We only talk about the white working class.
Oh, yeah.
It's just really weird. I don't really get it.
It's a big part of the book.
Big part of the book, because what it does, and this is when you realise how clever these framings are. People talk about the white working class not because they want to emphasise working class, but because they want to emphasise white. And what it does is that it turns class, which is...
Yeah, you see this on the right. I've seen this with Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad. Like, the attack on Tommy Robinson is attack on the working class, the white working class. Whereas he doesn't care about class. He's not... They only embrace class when they can kind of weaponize it against them. But when we actually talk about class, talk about wages, trade unions, workers' rights, the working class majority, and how they should have ownership of what they produce and a fair wage. Oh, it's like, oh, no. But again, white working class is just a racialized thing. So the problem is we have right identity politics on the right massively. They say they're against it, but they constantly go on about identity politics, a white working class, nationalism. They constantly play the victim mentality. So it's hard to fight it because when you're talking about identity politics on the right, it's kind of going to always lead to it on the left and a defensive, but it's not inevitable. We need a class analysis. And that's where the left has gone wrong, because Marx was talking about freedom from exploitation. And we need an intersectional analysis and see how class, race, gender, sexuality are all kind of interlinked. They're kind of inseparable. And I think you can talk about identity politics and class at the same time and the relationship between the two. But we've not been doing that because the culture war has pushed us in a way. The right have gone, look, talk about woke, DEI, trans people, but not class. And we should be redirecting the conversation and going, yes, trans people are valid, but let's talk about the class dynamics of trans people and redirect it to class, inequality, and workers' rights. Talk about workers' rights in relation to trans people. But we're not doing that.
A majority economic group into an ethnic minority.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Which is...
So identity politics, like genuinely, what do you feel about it?
So I think that, obviously you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think it's a good thing that there is a lower tolerance for slurs in the workplace or on university campuses than there used to be. I think that's good. I think it's good that we look at the feminist struggle as not just being about the gender pay gap, but also being about, vulnerability to sexual violence. These are all good things. Where I make a distinction is between liberal identity politics, by which I mean very individualistic, very concerned with representation in elite spaces, and the original identity politics, which was anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and pioneered by working class Black women in America. And they saw things completely differently. They were like, this is a vantage point. It's not a position of authority. It's not intersectional Olympics. May the most marginalized person win.
It's the most depressing Olympics.
You know what I mean? It's saying this vantage point from the bottom of the labor market tells us something about how America works. And I think that there's something good there.
Part of why the book needs to exist is to speak those problems and start the conversation that can move towards solutions. So solutions.
Yeah, exactly.
What do we do?
But that's the problem, is that, let's say we weren't talking about identity politics in a liberal framework and we were talking about class consciousness. Do you think the right would be any more, they'd go harder. They'd be going, it's a class war. They'd be cracking down. I mean, unions have been emasculated for the last 40 years. They'd still be fighting the same war and they'd still want to push it to the culture war. But we need to fight back, and that's the problem. We need to redirect the debate to inequality, class consciousness, the divide between the bottom, the people who create the wealth, and the people who extract and exploit the majority. But we don't talk about that because they're like, oh, vegan sausage rolls. And to an extent, you've got to engage with it. But like Bernie Sanders, he's so good at redirecting a question of like, talk about one thing and then redirect it towards inequality.
How do we be sexier?
Okay, push-up bra.
I don't think that's going to do anything for me. My tits are where my tits are at the end of the day.
That definitely seems like a Patreon special, that one, doesn't it? Please subscribe. Because we had, have you come across that YouTuber, Jimmy the Giant?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had him on and he talked about his own journey and about how basically he was initially drawn into, I guess you call it the alt-right, because he found them thrilling. He found them sexy, exciting. You know, there was something about the left that it wasn't the same. They seemed wet.
Censorious. Cry bullies.
Yeah, exactly. All of this.
And the thing is that there is a lot of truth in those things. And so, like, the first thing is that we've got to recognise what the weaknesses are in terms...
Again, I think this is time thing. I think there was a peak 2017, 18, 19 where you had, on YouTube specifically, a kind of woke scold, sensitive, be careful with your language. But I think it has changed a lot. I think there is a lot of progress. But I think for me, the main thing is having more voices on the left and embracing that kind of Marxist framework, which again, it's hard because they're being pulled in by the liberals who own the mainstream media, who kind of own the discourse and want to talk about that because, again, they can't talk about the real problems of capitalism.
The political culture we've created. Yeah. If we're always pushing our glasses up our nose and going, you can't say that, like, no wonder people...
It's a very, very accurate impression of my voice. I don't know whether that was conscious or subconscious, but it was very, very accurate.
Shots fired. But like if we're constantly doing some version of that, no wonder you're going to push people away. Nobody likes that person. No. I think the second thing, which is really important to remember, and this is what Reform do so well. I was on Politics Live and I encountered Rupert Lowe, who is one of Reform's MPs.
I think I wish we had, maybe they're in the book, but more specific examples, because the biggest people I think on the left, Owen Jones, yeah, he's not the most masculine, but I think he's pretty good at talking. He's good at engaging. And like, he is, does make jokes. He is pretty funny. But I think it's not necessarily how the left has evolved. It's the perception. And often they kind of don't align. And that's where we are definitely failing, because we are perceived as fuddy-duddy. Whereas if you look on the ground, leftists are some of the most edgy people you meet. I think leftists are funny. I think they are funny. But maybe when they're on a podcast or they kind of have to present themselves in a certain way. And that, is a problem.
And it was kind of laughable, but then you put it all together and I go, I completely see why you're doing this. From the moment we met in the green room, he put my hand in like a bone-crushing handshake, which is kind of like a Donald Trump thing, like, this is what it means to be dominant. And I was just like, my fingers. Oh, my little hand. Like he starts off with that, and then like we go on to set and he's interrupting, he's bombastic, he's assertive, he's constantly saying some version of, I don't care about that.
Right.
And what he's doing, and this is why it's so clever, is that he is being an embodiment of people's disdain for the status quo. It's not just he's saying it, he's embodying it. And I think that's something which parts of the left have often found very difficult. And it's the parts of the left which are closest to liberals. Our instinct a lot of the time is to be technocratic, policy focused, and to perhaps even defend institutions which people have completely lost faith in. So I think there's something there which is important about being able to feel anger with somebody. I think that's something which...
And also strength. Like, people do like strength, like in their leaders, that you're strong, you're confident in what you're saying. You have a vision and you're going to carry it out. Whereas Keir Starmer does not embody strength at all. He's not strong. He's not clear in his voice. I mean, Tony Blair was pretty good. He was a good rhetorician. He could talk and he could convince people. And the left really have lost that. Like, Ash is so right about just how we are kind of perceived as soy and emasculated. But I do think it's better than maybe she's making out. It depends where you go online. Again, there's some pretty edgy people. But you can't really, there is an element of truth that the left is just perceived as weak. But again, I'm really conflicted because when we are edgy and we're mean and we push back, it's like, oh, I thought you were meant to be the kind, loving guys that you're name calling. Like, that's really frustrating for me. That Donald Trump can call people stupid and pathetic, but we can't. But we can. We should. We should be vitriolic towards them and how they lie, how they're criminals, and be stronger. That's where the Democrats in America lost, is because they were weak. They were just weak. They just they just believe in institutions and the institution's right, and they should have gone after Donald Trump. All the crimes, all the stuff they had on him, and they didn't. Why wouldn't they use the full force of the law against Donald Trump? I would. I'd be like, he's going to prison. That's what I would have been my catchphrase. Lock him up, lock him up, lock him up. You need to be strong. You need to use the tactics against them. And they will gaslight us and say, oh, you're being mean. Oh. No, we've got to be more mean. We've got to be funny. We've got to be edgy and push back and be strong. It's about strength. People want strength in their leaders.
The left has missed out on, which is, I need you to feel this with me, because that is the heart of populism. And I think there's something else, which is, again...
Yeah, like the real anger. You need to really engage in that. People are angry. We saw riots on the street last summer. We need to, as a left, go, yeah, you are right to be angry. But not at immigrants. It's the people at the top. The people who have all the wealth and money. And they're telling us to argue amongst us between the white working class and brown immigrants. I'm sorry, you've got more in common with a working class refugee or immigrant than you have with Nigel Farage, privately educated, Rupert Lowe, privately educated, Richard Tice, privately educated. This is what we need to talk about. But again, we don't have the money and platforms, and it is hard. We are up against it as a left. We're like small fry compared to like the funding, the sourcing, the financial backing. It's genuinely depressing when you think about it.
Again, the left's proximity to liberalism means that we've become we're censorious, but we don't tell people, well, how do you live a good life? Whereas everybody from like slime balls like Andrew Tate to, Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan or whoever else you want to name, they're saying this is how you live, right? Some of those answers are terrible, but they're saying this is how you live. If you want to be a strong person, a successful person, this is how you do it. The left,
That is true. Oh.
left has sort of backed off from that because we've gone, well...
Yeah, that is true. The left is kind of like, doesn't talk about personal responsibility and hard work and taking account of your life. Because obviously we look at structural and systemic issues of inequality. And obviously we need to talk about them. They're important, massively important. But also we need to talk about how much agency we do have, which is not always a lot, but we do have agency in our lives to work hard, to provide and challenge the status quo and have a voice. And the left have really ceded that to the right. Like, I don't have a problem with going to the gym or, having a business or improving yourself. But we need to embrace that and go, yeah. I mean, Jimmy the Giant's really good on this. Like, be a hustler, do what you want. But where I do agree with the left is that you can do what you want. Ash is about to say this. Just don't harm people, which again isn't sexy. So we need to embrace, like, yeah, having a good life isn't a bad thing. Having money isn't a bad thing. It's how you use it and how you help people. We should be helping people, talking to people, having conversations with people who don't agree with us.
Well, everyone can do what they want.
Yeah.
Like, the thing about everyone can do what they want is that, like, I don't know about you, but, like, I respond really well to boundaries and instructions. That's how I know someone cares about me. And so I think...
Yeah, the paradox of freedom is you say you can do anything you want. Well, it kind of creates an anxiety and a kind of, Whereas if you are like, well, we need to talk about what it means to be a human. On the left, is what's a good human? What's a good person? Like, how do we live our lives under capitalism? It's not about recycling or, saying the right words. It's about how do we get people together for a common cause based on class, their exploitation, and lack of freedom, and go, we want to make people more free. We want a 4-day working week. We want proper wages. We want a democratic voice in our workplace. But it's been hijacked by liberal identity politics.
I think that we've vacated that terrain.
I would just like to end this interview on giving you a personal anecdote of a time that I found myself unwittingly defending the establishment. And that is when a relative...
So watch the rest of the interview. It's really interesting. She goes more into the book. Again, pre-order the book. It comes out on the 27th of February. Minority Rule. I'll probably talk about it in the future. Go and subscribe to Navarro if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next video.